The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the polished surfaces of the office. I sat at my desk, the weight of the world pressing down on me as I stared at the unassuming envelope that had changed everything. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a baby shower for one of my coworkers, but it felt like a cruel joke. They had just revealed the details of the equity package I was about to receive, $940 million, a figure that danced mockingly in my mind. Instead of joy, I felt an icy rush of betrayal wash over me. How could they do this to me? "Zoe, are you coming?" A voice broke through my thoughts. It was Clara, her excitement palpable as she gestured toward the gathering in the break room. I forced a smile, but it felt like a mask, hiding the turmoil beneath. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from the very people who had once called me a rising star. Instead, I nodded and followed her, the sound of laughter echoing hollowly in my ears. Each cheer felt like a dagger, slicing deeper into the wound of my dismissal. As I entered the room, the atmosphere was festive, balloons and streamers everywhere, but I felt like an outsider. The laughter felt distant, and I could hardly focus on the gifts being unwrapped. My mind was racing back to that moment in the boardroom just days before, when the announcement of my termination had landed like a bombshell. I could still see the smirks on their faces, the way they pretended to care while they stripped me of my dignity. "Zoe, you okay?" Clara's voice was laced with concern, pulling me back to the present. I forced a chuckle, brushing off her worry. "Yeah, just a little tired, I guess." But inside, a storm was brewing. I felt a fire igniting within me, a determination to uncover the truth behind my firing. The moment I stepped back into my office, the silence was deafening. I sat down, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened the envelope again, reading the figures that now felt tainted. I had to understand why they had betrayed me. I couldn't let this go unanswered. My heart raced with a mix of anger and resolve as I began plotting my next move. I was done being silent. The stakes were high and the path ahead was murky, but I knew one thing. I would not be reduced to a punchline in their corporate play. This was just the beginning of my fight for justice, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The office noise faded into the background as I steeled myself for the confrontation that awaited me, not just with the company, but with my mother, too. I could feel her disapproval looming like a shadow, but I wouldn't let her dictate my choices any longer. "This ends with me." The air in the corporate boardroom felt thick and suffocating as I sat at the long, gleaming table, surrounded by colleagues who had once been allies but now seemed distant. The walls were lined with muted gray panels, reflecting the sterile atmosphere that had become all too familiar. As I glanced around, I noticed the anxious expressions etched on their faces, a stark contrast to the laughter that used to fill these spaces. My heart raced, a steady drumbeat of frustration and anticipation. I was grappling with the aftermath of my recent firing, the sting of betrayal still fresh in my mind. It was during the baby shower for one of my coworkers that I had first learned about the equity package. A moment that should have been joyous had turned into a bitter reminder of what I had lost. I remembered the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter mingling with the sweet scent of cake. But the news hit me like ice water, freezing the smiles around me as I processed the magnitude of my situation. I had poured my soul into this company, and now, on the cusp of a financial windfall, I was discarded. After the meeting, I found myself in a quiet corner of the office, my mind racing. My fingers drummed nervously against the table, the sound echoing in my ears. I had always sought my mother's approval, but her disapproval loomed larger than ever. She had never understood my ambition, always reminding me of the family's values over the allure of corporate success. How could I expect her to support my decision to fight back? I replayed our last conversation in my mind, the tension palpable. It had been a family dinner, and I had shared my plans for the future, my dreams of making a mark in the corporate world. Her response had been swift and sharp, cutting through my hopes. "You're risking everything for a fleeting moment of success, Zoe," she had said, her voice a mixture of concern and disappointment. I felt the heat of her words even now, the weight of her expectations pressing down on my shoulders. As I sat alone, I felt a surge of resolve. I had to take action, to reclaim not just my equity but my sense of self. The thought of confronting my mother again filled me with dread, yet it also ignited a flicker of determination. I wouldn't let her doubts define me. The stakes were high, and I knew I had to navigate this labyrinth of corporate intrigue and familial expectations. My heart raced as I prepared to face the inevitable clash, knowing it might be the catalyst for the changes I desperately sought. The memories of laughter and camaraderie faded, replaced by a burning need to uncover the truth behind my firing. I could no longer afford to be passive. It was time to take the reins of my destiny. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee from the break room, and steeled myself for what lay ahead. My journey for justice was just beginning, and I was ready to confront whatever came my way. The office was dimly lit, the shadows creeping across the walls like whispers of betrayal. I sat in the HR office, my fingers clenched around the cool metal of the chair's armrests, feeling the tension in every fiber of my being. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety, punctuated by the distant hum of fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently. I faced Karen, the HR manager, whose expression was a mask of practiced neutrality, yet I could sense the underlying tension in her posture. "Zoe, this isn't personal, it's just business," she said, her voice steady but lacking warmth. I could see the slight twitch of her lip, a telltale sign of her own discomfort with the situation. I leaned forward, the fabric of my blouse tightening against my chest as I fought to contain my rising anger. "Not personal. You're telling me that after all these years of dedication and hard work, I'm just another number on a spreadsheet." My voice was louder than intended, echoing off the stark walls. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a mixture of humiliation and indignation. Karen's eyes darted to the door as if she expected someone to intervene. In that moment, memories flooded my mind, late nights spent poring over reports, weekends sacrificed for company deadlines. I had poured my heart into this job, and now it felt like a betrayal so profound it threatened to consume me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I struggled against the tide of emotions threatening to spill over. "Zoe, I'm sorry, but the decision is final. We're restructuring, and it's nothing personal. You'll receive your severance package, and we can part ways amicably," Karen said, her tone shifting to one of rehearsed sympathy. I clenched my fists tighter, resisting the urge to lash out. "Amicably? You think sending me off with a paycheck is enough to erase years of loyalty? I won't just disappear quietly." My voice trembled, revealing the fury I had tried so hard to suppress. I envisioned my colleagues, some who had cheered my successes, others who had whispered doubts, now watching this unfold, their faces a blur of shock and schadenfreude. As I turned to leave, the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. I could feel the scrutiny of the office around me, the whispers growing louder, and I realized that I had become the subject of their pity and judgment. I stormed out, the cold air hitting my face like a slap, invigorating my spirit even as it chilled my skin. But the anger inside me was a fire that refused to die. I needed to do something to reclaim my narrative and expose the injustice I had faced. Back at my desk, I rifled through my files, searching for anything, emails, documents, evidence that would shine a light on the corruption that I had always suspected but never dared to confront. As I scoured through the papers, the adrenaline coursed through my veins, fueling my determination. Each email I read became a piece of the puzzle, revealing the deceit that had been hidden behind corporate jargon and smiles. The company I had dedicated myself to was built on a foundation of lies, and I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. "This ends with me," I whispered to myself, the words a mantra that solidified my resolve. I would not be silenced. I would gather evidence, rally support, and expose the truth. The stakes were high, but I could no longer sit idly by. The betrayal was too deep, and the desire for justice burned brighter than my fear of the consequences. With newfound purpose, I began to draft a plan, using the very tools that had once chained me to this corporate facade. I would harness the power of my connections, my knowledge of the company's inner workings. It was time to turn the tide and fight back against the injustice I had endured. The air around me crackled with electricity as I imagined the possibilities. This was just the beginning of my fight for justice. As the clock ticked past midnight, the pale glow of my laptop screen illuminated the cluttered desk in my home office, casting long shadows that danced eerily along the walls. The faint hum of the computer filled the silence, a backdrop to my racing thoughts as I stared at the notes scattered before me, frantic scribbles outlining my plan to expose the company's dark secrets. I could almost taste the bitterness of betrayal lingering in the air, mingling with the stale scent of cold coffee. Every fiber of my being screamed for justice, yet a gnawing fear tugged at the edges of my resolve. What would happen if I went through with this? I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight as I closed my eyes, conjuring memories of the times I had poured my heart into the company. I recalled the late nights spent strategizing with colleagues, the laughter shared over celebratory drinks, all now overshadowed by a sense of impending doom. The betrayal felt like a cruel joke, and I was the punchline. I could hear my mother's disapproving voice echo in my mind, a constant reminder of the family reputation I was on the verge of tarnishing. "Zoe, don't let ambition blind you," she had warned, her words a premonition of the storm that threatened to engulf me. "I have to do this," I whispered to myself, my voice barely above a whisper as I gripped the edge of the desk for support. My heart pounded with a mix of desperation and determination. The weight of my decision pressed down on me like an anchor, dragging me into the murky depths of uncertainty. I needed to gather evidence, proof that would shake the corporate foundation to its core. But the thought of retaliation from my former colleagues, those I once called friends, made my stomach churn. Would they see me as a traitor? With a deep breath, I opened my eyes and turned back to the screen, fingers poised over the keyboard. I began typing out a list of potential allies, people who might be willing to help me navigate this treacherous path. Lisa's name stood out, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. She had always been my confidant, but would she support my quest for justice, or would she hesitate, fearing the consequences? I could almost hear her voice in my head, urging caution as I weighed my options. As I continued to brainstorm, my thoughts drifted to the looming confrontation with the corporate executives. The mere idea of facing them sent a shiver down my spine. I envisioned the boardroom, the polished table reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead, and the cold, calculating gazes of the executives as they scrutinized my every move. Would they dismiss my evidence, or would they retaliate with ruthless aggression? The tension hung thick in the air, an invisible barrier separating me from the truth I sought to uncover. I paused, letting the silence envelop me, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The stakes were high, and the fear of losing everything I had worked for threatened to paralyze me. Yet the thought of remaining silent while the company continued its unethical practices ignited a fire within me. I would not be silenced, I would not back down. With renewed resolve, I scribbled down additional names, creating a network of potential allies who could stand with me when the time came to act. As the night wore on, the shadows deepened, but a flicker of hope ignited within me. I felt a surge of creativity, a vision of what could be if I succeeded in exposing the truth. I would gather my evidence, confront the executives, and lay bare their misdeeds for all to see. The thought sent a thrill coursing through me, a promise of justice that beckoned just beyond my reach. I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, and I knew that the leap I was about to take would change everything. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, propelling me forward into the unknown as I prepared to face the corporate giants who had wronged me. With the first rays of dawn creeping through the window, I closed my laptop, a sense of clarity washing over me. I was ready to take the plunge and confront the executives. Justice was within my grasp, and I would not let fear dictate my next move. The time had come to expose the truth and reclaim my power. The coffee shop buzzed with the aroma of roasted beans and the faint sound of laughter, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I sat at a small table, my fingers nervously tapping against the ceramic mug, the warmth barely soothing the chill of uncertainty that gripped my heart. I had hoped this meeting would act as a bridge to mend the rifts created by my recent decisions, but doubt gnawed at me, twisting my stomach into knots. Would they even listen? As I waited, I replayed the last few days in my mind, the cacophony of voices and resentful glances from the office haunting me. My best friend Lisa had suggested this meeting, a chance to foster understanding and perhaps bring closure to the chaos I had sown. Yet I remained uncertain if my colleagues would be receptive or if they would see my attempts at reconciliation as mere damage control. The thought made my palms sweat, and I wiped them against my jeans, the fabric a rough reminder of my reality. When David finally arrived, his expression was guarded, his usual warmth tempered by the weight of our recent conflicts. His presence brought a flicker of comfort, but I could still sense the lingering tensions between us. "You really think they'll come around?" he asked, his voice low, as if the question itself could shatter the fragile peace we had managed to construct. I nodded, forcing a smile, though inside I felt like a tightrope walker on the edge of a precipice. "I have to believe they will. I just need to show them I'm committed to fixing this, to making things right," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I glanced out the window, watching the leaves dance in the autumn breeze, a reminder of the change I desperately sought. Perhaps if I could just share my vision for recovery, they would understand that my intentions were not rooted in selfish ambition, but in genuine concern for our team's future. As the minutes ticked by, my heart raced with anticipation, the door chiming as familiar faces shuffled in, each one a ghost from my past, reminders of shared victories that now felt far away. The air thickened with unspoken words as they settled around the table, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the potential outcomes of this meeting. "Thank you for coming," I started, my voice wavering slightly. "I know things have been difficult since the budget cuts, and I want to discuss how we can move forward together." I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they shifted in their seats, and I braced myself for the inevitable pushback. But this was my moment to shine a light on the path ahead, even if it felt like walking through a minefield. Their responses were mixed, some nodded cautiously while others crossed their arms, a physical barrier that spoke volumes. The discussion quickly escalated, voices rising in a symphony of frustration and hurt. I felt my heart sink with each rebuttal, the words piercing deeper than I had anticipated. My attempts to explain my rationale for the cuts were met with resistance, as if I were speaking a foreign language. In one particularly heated moment, Lisa shot her hand up, her voice cutting through the confusion. "You can't just expect us to forget what happened, Zoe. We feel betrayed, and no amount of coffee will fix that." Her words stung, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I had hoped for understanding, but all I felt was the weight of my failure crashing down around me. Despite the setbacks, I pressed on, fueled by a mix of desperation and determination. I shared my vision for recovery, how we could regain our footing and rebuild trust, but the resistance was palpable. Each objection felt like a wall rising higher, a reminder of how far I had fallen from their grace. As the meeting progressed, I realized that the path to peace would be far more arduous than I had anticipated, but I refused to give up. As the discussions wound down, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me like a warm blanket. While I hadn't achieved the immediate reconciliation I had hoped for, I knew that my journey toward healing would require patience and unwavering commitment. I left the coffee shop feeling the weight of my failures, but also the flicker of determination igniting within me. This was not the end, but merely a stepping stone in my quest for redemption. As I sat at my desk, the muted sounds of the bustling office behind me faded into a dull thrum. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows on my workspace. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, but my mind was miles away, tangled in a web of anxiety and anticipation. It was then that a slip of paper caught my eye, an anonymous tip that had been slipped under my door earlier that morning. I unfolded it, my breath hitching as I read the hastily scrawled words, "They're covering up something big. Find out before it's too late." A chill ran down my spine. The implications of what I held in my hands were staggering, and a whirlwind of thoughts swirled in my mind. What secrets were being hidden? Who could I trust? I felt a rush of adrenaline course through me, the stakes rising higher than I ever anticipated. My heart raced, and I could almost hear the pounding in my ears as I considered the gravity of this information. This was not merely a chance to expose the company's wrongdoings. It was a lifeline, a way to reclaim my voice and perhaps my power. I glanced around the office, seeing my colleagues engaged in their daily routines, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within me. The tension in my chest tightened as the fear of consequences loomed large. What if my actions triggered a backlash? What if I was silenced once more? Shaking off the doubts, I clenched the note in my fist, determination simmering just beneath the surface. I would not let fear dictate my actions. The thought of confronting my mother, Linda, flashed through my mind. Her influence over the company was undeniable, and I knew she would do anything to protect her interests, even if it meant trampling over my own. I stood, my legs trembling slightly as I made my way to the parking lot, the weight of the note in my pocket, a constant reminder of the path I was about to embark on. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, invigorating yet daunting. I took a deep breath, feeling the crispness clear my mind. It was now or never. I had to act on this information, to expose the secrets that could potentially shake the very foundation of the company I had devoted my life to. With each step towards my car, I felt a surge of clarity wash over me. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I would face Linda, I would confront the corporation, and I would not back down. The time for silence was over. I was ready to take control of my narrative, ready to fight for what was right. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I would seize it with both hands. The plan was forming in my mind, and I knew that the climax of this battle was just around the corner. I slid into my car, the engine roaring to life beneath me, my heart pounding in sync with the revving sound. I was determined, focused, and now more than ever I understood what I had to do. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, I felt alive with purpose. It was time to act, time to unleash the truth, and time to reclaim my power. The dim light of my home office pulsed with a sterile intensity, illuminating the chaos around me. Papers littered my desk, scribbled notes and half-formed ideas competing for attention. I could feel the cool surface beneath my fingers, grounding me as the tension in the room thickened, almost suffocating. The scent of burnt coffee clung to the air, a reminder of my late-night brainstorming sessions that had only fueled my determination. I was on the brink of something big, yet the stakes felt overwhelming. As I paced back and forth, my mind raced with thoughts of the equity package I had learned about at the baby shower, a cruel twist of fate that left me seething with betrayal. I could still hear the muffled laughter from that joyful event, now tainted by my reality. My heart pounded against my chest, each beat a reminder of the injustice I faced. I was no longer just a victim. I was ready to become an architect of my own destiny. I grabbed a marker and began sketching out my plan on the whiteboard, the markers gliding across the surface like whispers of hidden truths. The first step was to gather evidence, damning proof of the company's unethical practices that I had stumbled upon in the shadows of my discontent. This was my leverage, my weapon in a battle that was as much about survival as it was about justice. I could almost taste the anticipation in the air, a heady mix of excitement and fear. Late-night phone calls with Lisa became our clandestine strategy sessions, the thrill of plotting against my former employers coursing through my veins. I could feel the adrenaline as we discussed our next moves, her voice a steady anchor amidst the storm of my emotions. "We need to approach this carefully, Zoe. We can't let them see us coming," she warned, and I nodded, her words resonating deeply. This was not about reckless revenge, it was about exposing the truth and reclaiming my power. Yet doubts crept in like shadows, whispering reminders of the consequences that could follow. What if I lost everything in this pursuit? As I stood before the whiteboard, the outlines of my plan taking shape, I realized that the path ahead was fraught with peril. But I was determined. I would not be reduced to a punchline, nor would I allow my silence to be mistaken for consent. This was my moment, and I would seize it before it slipped away. The room buzzed with possibility, and I was ready to execute the next steps in my plan, knowing that the time for action was fast approaching. The boardroom was a battleground, its atmosphere thick with tension that crackled like static in the air. I stood at the head of the table, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as I prepared to unveil my plan. The fluorescent lights above seemed to cast everything in harsh relief, illuminating the determined faces of the executives before me. I felt the weight of their scrutiny, the pressure suffocating, but I had come too far to turn back now. I took a moment to steady my breath, recalling the countless nights spent brainstorming with Lisa, our laughter echoing in the quiet of my home office as we plotted our course. Now, the stakes were higher than ever. "Today we confront the truth together," I declared, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I could see a flicker of surprise in their eyes, but I pressed on. "We've let fear dictate our actions for too long, and it's time to expose the reality behind our company's decisions." As I laid out the details of my strategic plan, I could feel the room shift, a palpable energy igniting as I spoke. I detailed how we would not only address the recent financial fallout, but also how we would engage our clients and rebuild trust within our team. The murmurs of disbelief began to fade, replaced by an unexpected silence as they absorbed my words. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, fueling my resolve. "This isn't just about numbers, it's about people, our people," I continued, locking eyes with various executives. "We owe it to them to be transparent, to own our mistakes. I will not shy away from the consequences of my actions, but I will also not allow this company to crumble under the weight of our failures." Glancing at Lisa, who sat with a mix of skepticism and hope etched on her face, I felt a surge of determination. I needed her support now more than ever. "We can't change the past, but we can shape our future. I'm asking you all to join me in this fight to reclaim our integrity and our vision for this company," I urged, my heart racing as I awaited their response. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Then, to my surprise, David spoke up, his voice steady and clear. "Zoe's right, we have the opportunity to redefine who we are. Let's not waste it." His words were a catalyst, igniting a spark of agreement among the board members. As discussions began to flow, I felt a renewed sense of purpose settle within me, washing away the remnants of doubt. The tide was turning, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the burden of my choices begin to lift. We were on the precipice of something great, and I was determined to see it through. The meeting continued, and I felt a rush of relief and satisfaction as I witnessed my colleagues rallying around the new vision. I had taken a stand, faced my fears, and called for change. This was just the beginning, but I was ready to fight for our future, one strategic decision at a time. Leaving the boardroom, I felt the weight of the world shift slightly off my shoulders. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was no longer alone in this battle. Together, we would forge a new path, one built on trust and transparency. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I vowed not to let it slip away. I took a deep breath, savoring the taste of victory and the promise of what lay ahead. This was my chance to reclaim not just my role, but my integrity, and I would not let it go to waste. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the park where I found myself sitting on a weathered bench, the wood rough against my palms. I could hear the distant laughter of children playing, their joy starkly contrasting the weight of my thoughts. The air was tinged with the scent of blooming flowers, yet it felt heavy with the remnants of my recent turmoil. I was grappling with the aftermath of my decisions, the echoes of my confrontations still reverberating in my mind. How had I allowed ambition to blind me so completely? As I stared at the ground, I recalled the faces of my colleagues, the disappointment etched in their expressions, the whispers of betrayal that had filled the air. I had fought hard for my vision, but in doing so, I had lost sight of the very people who had once rallied behind me. Each memory felt like a sharp pang in my chest, a reminder of the trust I had shattered. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, hoping it could somehow wash away the guilt that clung to me like a shadow. In the days that followed my confrontation, I had made strides to rebuild the bridges I had burned. I reached out to Lisa, inviting her to share her thoughts and frustrations, and slowly we began to mend our friendship. Her laughter, once a distant memory, started to fill the empty spaces in my life again. We met regularly, discussing not just work but our shared dreams, and with each conversation I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. Yet the journey was far from over. I still had to confront my mother. The tension between us had always simmered beneath the surface, her expectations weighing heavily on my shoulders. I had avoided the conversation for too long, but I knew it was time to confront the reality of our relationship. I scheduled a dinner with her, my stomach twisting with anxiety as I prepared for the inevitable clash of wills. Would she see the change in me, or would she continue to push her agenda, blind to the lessons I had learned? As I approached that dinner, I felt a mix of determination and trepidation. I wanted to assert my independence, to show her that I had grown from this experience. The table was set, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tensions as we exchanged pleasantries. But as we delved into deeper topics, I laid my cards on the table, sharing my reflections on the company's culture and my role within it. I wanted her to understand that I was no longer just her daughter. I was a leader and I sought to carve my own path forward. As the evening progressed, I could see the flicker of realization in her eyes, a moment of vulnerability that I had not anticipated. We spoke honestly, and in that exchange I felt a shift in our dynamic. It was not a neat resolution, but it was a step toward healing. I left the dinner feeling lighter, the burden of our strained relationship easing just a fraction. I knew the road ahead would still be rocky, but for the first time I felt a sense of closure creeping in, a fragile acceptance of my past actions and their consequences. My journey was far from over, but hope was beginning to take root, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across my living room as I sat on the couch, reflecting on the tumultuous journey I had endured. The air was filled with a sense of calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once engulfed my life. I could still feel the weight of the decisions I had made, each one a stepping stone towards reclaiming my integrity. The walls, adorned with photographs of happier times, seemed to whisper promises of renewal and hope. In that moment, I realized that the fight for justice had reshaped me in ways I had never anticipated. I had faced my mother, my colleagues, and my own demons, emerging not just as a survivor but as a leader who understood the true essence of empathy and collaboration. The scars of betrayal would always be a part of my story, but they had become markers of growth rather than symbols of defeat. As I prepared to share my experiences with others, I felt a surge of motivation coursing through me. I wanted to inspire those who found themselves in similar struggles, to show them that it was possible to rise from the ashes of betrayal and reclaim their narrative. My journey was not just about personal redemption. It was about fostering a culture where voices were heard and integrity was valued. I envisioned a community of individuals standing together, sharing their stories, and supporting one another in their quests for justice. Empowered by my own transformation, I decided it was time to take action. I would create a platform where others could find solace, guidance, and encouragement. With newfound determination, I picked up my phone and began drafting a message to my friends and colleagues, inviting them to join me in this endeavor. As I typed, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. This was my chance to not only heal but to help others navigate their own journeys. I concluded the message with a call to action, urging them to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. It was time to move forward together, and I was ready to lead the way.